So today's webinar, I think, Ingrid, this is I think it's our 10th in total, which is great.
Wow.
What we're going to be talking about today is dealing with inertia. And so I suppose to set the scene a bit, we thought it would be worth talking about this because many companies are worried about the sales teams not getting in front of customers. And to talk about, is that an important thing? Should they be getting in front of their customers? Is it okay to do it virtually? And if it is important, why is that the case? When are the times that it's okay to meet virtually? When are the times where you need to be face-to-face? How does everything work in this new hybrid world, I should say? And what should sales leaders expect from their salespeople in the current environment? And for those of you who are first-timers, please let me introduce Ingrid Maynard, who's my co-host and has been on this journey. We've been on this journey together for for over a year and a half now, I think. And Ingrid is the founder of The Sales Doctor, based down in Melbourne. And for those of you who don't know me, I'm Richard Forrest. I'm the founder of Forrest Marketing Group up in Sydney. So it's a truly national webinar. I thought we would kick off. Ingrid, if you're okay, I was going to ask you a couple of questions. I know this is a topic you're really involved in and really passionate about.
Yes.
So if I may, I was going to jump in and just ask, despite the restrictions and the mandates being lifted now, more or less, some salespeople are still a bit anxious about meeting prospects and customers. From your experience, what's driving this, do you think?
Yeah, well, some of it's very real and genuine anxiety. Some people really are still a little bit COVID anxious, if I can coin that phrase. And for those who aren't necessarily, sometimes their customers are, so it can add a layer of complexity into, the way that they can build momentum. So some of it's, quite genuine. And then if you take COVID out of the situation, when people haven't been in a person-to-person sales meeting for quite a while, and I'm talking about with our customers and prospects, there's some genuine social anxiety, even from people that are normally incredibly resilient and, previous to the last 2 years have had zero resistance to getting out there and to maximising their cadence. So we've got this very real phenomenon, and unfortunately there's no way around it other than getting back out there. Similar to, any kind of other fitness, the only way we can get is by doing the hard work. So those first couple of face-to-face meetings are going to be really uncomfortable, probably clunky. But once we start to get back into the rhythm of things, we'll find our footing again. And it might have changed from last time to pre-COVID, but we've got to really force ourselves out of our comfort zone so that we're back into practice.
It's without meaning to trivialize it, because I do understand people are nervous about getting out face to face, but it's kind of like getting back on a bike and learning to ride it again after you've fallen off, right? And you've got to take those steps, and once you do it, it becomes easier and easier to get back into that habit again. It does, absolutely. Yeah. And what do you think has been the impact of virtual selling, online meetings, on face-to-face selling in the B2B space? Yeah, it's really interesting. I've been quite fascinated by some of the research that's been undertaken, certainly by Gartner, and McKinsey have also done some research around that space. What they're saying is that there's a blurred line now between field sales teams and inside sales teams. So people who have traditionally gone to market and, managed the sales process either on the phone or now with Zoom, where does, that line's been blurred because, field sales people have also been using Zoom as well as being in person. So the lines are blurred. And I think that that's a great opportunity for a lot of organizations because it means that they can expand their inside sales team and perhaps even expand the remit and size of those accounts that those people manage and grow because they've got greater skill sets, greater capacity, greater capability now.
It's also enabled companies to reduce the cost of sales a little bit. So, traditionally inside salespeople just don't carry the same costs that in-field people do. They're not driving cars, they're not paying tolls, they're not paying for registration, there's no parking, petrol, especially today, they're all considerations. So there could be a realignment towards, okay, well, if we've got an expand inside sales team because we can reduce the cost of sales and increase our level of connection, reach, and potentially even our outcomes, then how can we redeploy our top level field team, alongside, so that they're targeting our AA and our A customers? So I think there's that. The other thing that I'm noticing too is that, unfortunately, so that's the positive. The downside is that some people have forgotten the power of the energy exchange that only happens in person. So when you're in front of somebody, it's really easy to forget until you're there again and be reminded of just how powerful that energy exchange is. And there's something that happens in that face-to-face meeting that you simply cannot get in this kind of space, which is the unspoken nuances of trust building and a deeper level of trust building. So that's certainly something that, I personally have reminded myself, and I know that that's the feedback from a lot of the clients I've got. The other thing too, with virtual selling, because of that trust factor, it can take a little bit longer to get the same outcomes because they're so outcome driven. There's no meandering conversation. So the nuances simply aren't there. Context is a lot harder to get to, and you're kind of left only with a question exchange. So my suggestion there is that you kind of intersperse face-to-face, so you get the trust, you get that relationship with, some virtual meetings as well. And it forces us all into thinking about, well, let's think about our customers and how they like to buy, and let's realign our sales teams accordingly.
That's a really interesting point, actually, is to think about how the customers like to buy as opposed to what we want to do. And that's a really, really salient point, I think. One of the things I heard somebody told me recently is one of the downsides with online meetings is you have no eye contact, because you're looking at the photograph of the person, not at the camera. And that camera isn't the eye of the other person. So you can't build that level of trust in the same way online as you can face to face.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, very, very good points. So what do you think, and I know you do a lot of work in this area, what can sales leaders do right now to get their sales teams back on track, or maybe not back on track, but on track to hitting targets and meeting face to face again?
Yeah, absolutely. So, and I speak mainly about field sales teams when I talk about these things here. I think one of the things that they can do is to be absolutely clear about when a virtual meeting is okay and when a face-to-face meeting is preferred. One of the things that, if people after this session would like to ask Richard or email Richard or myself, I'll send them an article that I think is still pertinent today. It was written by Forbes, and they were actually referring to email, but I think that the same principles apply to remote engagement as opposed to face-to-face. And they were talking about the key conversations that you really must have in person. And so I think that will summarize a lot of that stuff. So I think when it comes to sales leadership, there needs to be some clear criteria around when to do, which option and which format. The other thing too is about focusing on enablement. So we cannot send our sales teams out, armed only with a stick when in fact, we're in a war to reclaim a lot of that lost revenue at the moment. So I think they need to really focus on getting them, sales ready again in the in-person format. So just reinvestigating some training, and sales leaders also need to be better coaches. So the in-field coaching and support of observation and, in the moment coaching, and enabling that person to have better self-awareness so that they can iterate as well. Yeah.
That's really interesting. I think what you've said there, what's come through to me is that we've got to change the hybrid model. So up until now, we've been using, you know, face-to-face meetings, typically some phone calls, etc. But now with online meetings, let's encapsulate that into the sales process. Every company, I'm guessing, is going to be slightly different as to when it's face-to-face and when it's virtual, and how they put that together. But that's, I guess, one of the big challenges for sales leaders is working out what is the cadence.
Yeah.
What is the face-to-face? When does the face-to-face happen? When is it okay for online to happen, right?
Yeah, 100%, Richard. So, you know, you've sort of mentioned, you know, really about how we get teams back out there, and sometimes it just is really hard to meet in person. So what are your thoughts about what we can do to maximize the attendance of virtual meetings?
Yeah, I suppose I see a lot of virtual meetings, and I know there is online meeting fatigue, which plays a part.
Yes.
But I think one of the pieces of feedback I hear consistently about online meetings is the level of no-shows. That people just don't show up at meetings. Now that might be because of a number of different things. But my underlying thought is that people haven't suddenly changed and become completely rude and they've just abandoned meetings and they've left you there. I think that's really unusual for that to happen. I think probably what has happened is they've been called out. And I suppose if I paint the two pictures, if you're going to a face-to-face meeting, you rock up at the company, you walk into reception, you ask the receptionist for the person you want to meet, and they'll go and call him or her.
Yes.
And if they're not in their office, they'll look for them and they'll put out a call and find out where they are. And you might have to wait in the reception area for 10 or 15, 20 minutes if they're running late for a meeting, but that meeting will go ahead. It's very rare for that person not to actually be there in the building.
Yes.
Online, so I think that's what happens in the real world.
Yeah.
In the online world, the same thing happens, except that you go onto an online meeting and you're sitting there in front of a computer screen and going, he or she hasn't shown up. What the heck's going on? And your mind starts to go, they've just dumped me. They didn't want the meeting, etc. You go into overdrive. Yeah, exactly. And I think that if you come back to the analogy or the situation that happens when you're face to face, it might take 10 or 15 minutes to locate that person, but the receptionist is doing that for you.
Yeah.
Online, you don't have that ability so much. So you've got to, I think, be prepared for people not to show, and then to take the steps that you would try to take in a face-to-face meeting, which is to try and track them down. So if they're not there and they're not there in a very short period of time, you can try emailing them. But my suggestion is to get on the phone to the office, talk to the receptionist, and explain the situation in the same way as you would do face-to-face.
Yeah.
Bob's not here for the meeting. Could you see if you could find him for me? And you might just find out that he's in a meeting and it's overrun, same as you did face-to-face. And you can relay a message through that receptionist, or you can do it by email and say, I'll hold on the meeting and I'll wait for you in 10 or 15 minutes, so that you get the meeting to go ahead. One of the key attributes of good salespeople is persistence.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the times where you want it to come to the fore. Don't kind of go, oh, he or she's not turned up, I'm therefore just going to give up and assume that the meeting wasn't meant to go ahead. But actually be persistent. That's what salespeople typically are and need to be. So go and email them, call their mobile if you've got that, find if you can track them down, call the receptionist at the office, see if they can track them down for you, but be persistent. And if you say, it's fine if he's running late or she's running late, I'll stay on the meeting, I can do some work in the background. As soon as they're ready, I'll be here for them. What you're kind of doing is you're saying, let's not let the schedule slide. This meeting is important to me. I'm happy to hang on for it. So that's one of the things. The other thing is, if it does fall through for some reason, they can't be found and you can't get them on the meeting, try and get that meeting rescheduled as soon as possible afterwards. Don't let it drift. Don't assume that they've just ghosted you. It's probably something like they got held up in a meeting and they just can't get to your meeting. The other thing I would say is to make sure with online meetings that you have a really strong reconfirmation process. So call people and email them and remind them about the meeting in the days leading up to it, so that it doesn't get lost in the fog of things that are happening and they just go, oh God, I've forgotten about that. Because some people are like that naturally, and they run from one thing to another.
Yeah.
Then, and when they're face to face and you're in reception and the receptionist calls them, they go, oh yeah, right, got to go to that meeting. But when it's online, maybe their disorganization perhaps gets the better of them. So having a strong reconfirmation process in the days and perhaps hours leading up to that meeting are the other things I would do.
Yeah, I totally agree. And Greg's raised an interesting point about the difference of the level of commitment between face-to-face and virtual. I think, you know, how you talked about the reconfirmation process, I actually think that, you know, the relationship starts from that first engagement. So whether that comes in via phone call or whether that comes in via a text or an email or through a referral from somebody else, it's really about how you then engage with that person that gives them, you know, a level of commitment to want to come along to that meeting, and then getting a mobile number so that if you're sitting, you know, in a meeting, for example, and you're waiting for that person, you can say, I'm in here, I'm waiting. And it's almost like you're just making the assumption, of course, that they're going to attend. And I generally find that, you know, people, you know, who have a genuine desire to meet, if they can't come, they'll absolutely reschedule, Richard. So
sorry, just one more thing on that, Ingrid, because you raised a valid point. I think that if you're texting somebody to say, hey, I'm just in the meeting, I'm just waiting for you.
That's right.
Yeah, I think it's a really good idea. So getting a mobile number so you can do that. I would be prepared for people to come back and say, I'm sorry, I've been detained, can we reschedule? My thoughts on that is no, don't allow it to be rescheduled at that point. Say, I would go back and say, it's fine, I've got the time set aside. If you're just running 15 or 20 minutes or a little bit late, I'm happy to stay on the call. So make the importance of the meeting more obvious by not allowing it just to shift off. No, I really want to meet with you, happy to hang on. I don't mind waiting type thing.
Okay, that's a really good point there. So do you think we should still push for face-to-face sales meetings or sales calls when we can?
Yes, I think we should. I don't think, though, that it should be used as a barrier for moving things forward. So if in your sales team, you've got somebody who's saying, I just can't meet with people face to face, and therefore that's why I'm not getting meetings, don't let that be a barrier. Get them into online virtual meetings if they have to. But yeah, I really think that, I think something that you talked about earlier is the level of commitment in a face-to-face meeting, and eye contact and rapport, all those things. So what we do, as you know, is lead generation, and I would say that first meeting, wherever possible, from a cold lead gen call, should be face-to-face, because that's where you build that commitment and that trust. That's where you actually get some momentum going, and those sorts of leads are often earlier in the sales funnel. They don't know much about you. So if they're going to learn about you, try and do it face to face. I think there are some other things to consider as well, which is, as I said, go for online and have that in the cadence and as a backup. But if you're up against a competitor and they're prepared to meet face to face and you're not, and you're starting from the same point, my guess is that the person who meets face to face is going to have a head start on you.
I agree with you. Yes.
So I think for that reason, I would really be pushing for face to face wherever possible. I think also if you are selling a high priced item or something that is complex, I think it's much easier to build the relationship face to face, at least to start with, and then drop back on online. It's not always going to be the case. There are going to be times where the only way to do it is by online. But I think in terms of should we be pushing for face-to-face, I think so. I think it shows your commitment as a salesperson to that prospect.
I agree.
And I think it helps build all of the things that we need in the sales process. But on the other hand, let's not allow it to be used as a barrier and an excuse for not hitting sales numbers. And, you know, as a sales manager, if you can go out with your sales team and show them how to do face-to-face meetings in this post-COVID world, you get them back on the horse again, I guess.
Yeah, no, absolutely spot on. And there is a place for both. So what's your opinion or experience about when we should push for, you know, one or the other?
It's a really hard question, I think, to be definitive about, and I'm sure people in the audience, participants today, will have their feedback on this too, which will be interesting to see. I think that if it's a fairly simple sale or it's a low priced item, I think that's probably what we've done in the past, actually, is that can be done on the phone or now virtually. So I suppose if you used to sell on the phone and you could have that process online, then I would be looking at online, because I think that you do get good rapport going on a meeting. It doesn't mean you have to replace your phone calls with online, but I think you can build that into the process. I think you can use phone and online for those sorts of things. Higher value, though, I really think you're doing yourself a disservice if you opt to go for online rather than face-to-face. And it'll be determined by the client as much as by you, but you're the salesperson. And when you're the salesperson, you need to be in control of the process. So if your process is face-to-face meeting, don't accept the customer or the prospect saying, oh, can we do this online, and just drop back to that. I think it's important to maintain the process that works for you. And if that is face-to-face, then to gently push back and say, look, I'd really much rather to come around and meet with you. If it's clearly not possible, and it's not, but I think as salespeople, we should get used to, and we should be used to, not accepting the first no. And the first no in this case would be, no, could we do it online? Yeah. Actually, no, I prefer to do it face-to-face. When's a good time? How to come round, etc. And you can make it a bit of fun, as you did in the old days. Bring a cup of coffee, bring a donut, whatever you want to do. And I think those times you really want to include face-to-face. I think you can also make a decision based on the type of person you're meeting. So there are arguments and counter arguments for both of these. So if you're talking to an existing customer, you might go, actually, I don't need to meet with them face to face, at least not every time.
Yeah, that's right.
I can do the selling online, right? Yeah. If it's a brand new sale, put yourself in the driver's seat. I think that's the whole idea. If you've got a prospect who's interested in you, take time to go and meet them and show them your commitment.
Yeah.
I think if you also think about how busy the person is. Now, here's where the two arguments collide. If you're going to be meeting with somebody who's really busy, should you just go with online because it shows it's easier for them, you know, and you don't use as much of their time, or do you push for face-to-face?
Yeah.
I think I'd push for face-to-face because I want that person's attention for the time that I'm there. Okay, they might be harder to meet with, but we've all done this online, and probably some of our participants are doing it now. They're listening to the call, but they're also checking their email, or there's a message that's come in, and you don't get the person's full attention for the entire meeting when they're online. You can see their eyes glaze over as they look at something in their calendar. Yeah. That doesn't happen in a face-to-face.
No, it doesn't, Richard. You're spot on. And we do things in a virtual space that we wouldn't dream of doing, you know. You're absolutely right.
Yeah. So my thing is I would push for face-to-face whenever I can, whenever I've never met a prospect or a customer before. And make that the first step, and I would be persistent in trying to get that. Okay. If somebody is busy, I think, yes, you can say, they're busy, it's a better use of their time to do this online, but actually it's not the best use of your time, and they won't get as much out of the meeting held online where they're going to be interrupted by other things going on their computer. Take the time to meet them face-to-face is my recommendation, I suppose. And I would be pushing for that wherever I can.
Yeah, great. Because Greg actually asked that question. I think you've Greg, you can tell us whether that's sufficiently answered that, what's your take on giving the prospect or client the option of face-to-face or virtual? I think Richard's well and truly covered off. Yeah. Thanks for that, Greg. Yeah, great.
Yeah. But I would be interested in other people's opinions.
Yeah.
I know that we've got Sam on here, and she's really into the art of negotiation. And actually, that's a really good point. If you're going to have a negotiation, I'm guessing you want to try and do that face-to-face rather than online if you can. But I'd be interested in seeing if anybody has any comments around that.
Sam's got her hand up, Richard, if you're...
Yep. What does that mean? Does that mean I can allow her to talk? Sam.
Yay!
Hello. How are you both?
Hello, Sam.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me to speak. It's been really challenging for the last couple of years trying to negotiate via Zoom, and even worse when people have their camera off. And so, what that forces us to do is to really listen, which I love, but it also, we miss a bit when we can't see the body language. If we're asking someone for a high value product, we can see from their body language whether that's a go or a no go, and then, steer the conversation from there. So face to face is the best. You build that rapport. One thing I talk about a lot at the moment is, imagine you started your career in the last 3 years. You've never stood outside of a meeting room and built that relationship just talking about shoes or watches or hair. So there's something missing in the way that we've had to adjust for the last couple of years. So I get what you're saying, Ingrid, about the COVID fear. I think that was the word you used. It's absolutely real. But when people are not COVID fearful, then we should be pushing for face-to-face, just because you might not, it takes longer to get a deal done than we always think. Everyone thinks, oh, quick, let's get it done, It's very rare it happens in one sitting.
Yes.
So we have to run that relationship building in parallel, and then the face-to-face, whether it's via Zoom or in human form, we do need to see people's reactions to the dollar figures and the ask that we're putting down, or the position that we're pushing.
Oh, wow. Yeah. From the negotiation queen herself. Thank you, Sam.
Thank you, Sam. I appreciate that. And I think I'm just looking back at a couple of comments from people, and I think as Greg said, face-to-face requires skin in the game, whereas online just requires you to get out of bed and turn on a computer, which is actually quite true. And I think if you're trying to sell to somebody, if you can see them face-to-face, you've got that commitment to the meeting. And sales is all about taking baby steps to get to the end of the journey, and a baby step is getting the customer or the prospect to a face-to-face meeting. I think you get that, then you get the next step.
Absolutely.
I think we're almost out of time. Is there anything else, Ingrid, you wanted to cover before we wrap up, or as we wrap up?
No, but I really would like to thank everyone, in particular Greg. Greg's been incredibly, he's definitely lent into today's discussion, and his final comment was, that it takes about 5 touch points to really get somebody to know and like you and trust you. And I think that we can leverage, all of the different mechanisms and levers we now have at our disposal that we perhaps didn't have, pre-COVID. But I think that there are some fundamental truths to the way that we engage with people and the way that people, get to build a relationship together. So we need to maximize those when we can. And we always need to, work smarter so that we're minimizing cost of sale. So virtual when it's not absolutely critical to have that face-to-face, but, not forgetting that we've got phone, we've got face-to-face, we've got virtual, we've got email, we've got promotions, we've got text, we've got LinkedIn. We've got so many different ways that we can engage with people, but we can't ever forget that it's people at the end of the day that we're trying to build relationships with and who buy from us.
Yes, I think that's a very valid point. And I think one of the things you said at the beginning is, there is some genuine fear out about meeting, etc. But let's get past that. We're all salespeople. Sales is a skill and a mindset, and not everybody can do it. If we allow it to get dumbed down to its lowest level, we're not going to get the results we want. What we want is salespeople who are hungry for sales. They're happy to work hard. They're going to be persistent, all of those things. Let's make sure we encourage those traits and bring them back to the fore as we continue selling now.
Absolutely.
Great. Well, look, Ingrid, it's lovely to see you again. Thank you very much. Look forward to seeing you actually in person next week, which will be great. Again, yeah. Thank you to all of our panelists, all of our attendees, I should say, today for coming on to the webinar. I hope you've enjoyed it. We will be putting out the recording of this if you want to either share it or watch it again. And that will come out probably later this week. But thank you very much. Our next one will be in a couple of months' time. If anybody has any topics they'd like us to talk about or to cover in particular, please let us know. So it'll probably be, where are we now? July, so September, start of September, we'll get together again. Gosh, the whole year goes past.
No.
But thank you, everybody. Really nice to see you, Ingrid. Thank you, everybody, for your attendance. And we'll see you again next time.
Incredible.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.